everybody. Welcome to our Act Mini on Goals, where you get to join Sarah and I as we talk ourselves in complete circles around this issue. It's one that we discuss a lot, and I don't think we've ever really landed on a conclusion, have we?
We have not. However, we do it with an acceptance and willingness and some flexibility around the fact that, yes, we are going in circles, and maybe that's quite all right.
But, if you're going to go in circles, you might as well go with a friend, right? But I do hear this issue come up a lot with colleagues in private practice, especially, who feel a lot of pressure that there has to be a goal, like one single goal, all the steps will be lined up, and every single session there must be a move towards the goal. And I think it can put so much pressure on people sometimes. I hear them, getting into this state where they're doing one experiential after another if the first one doesn't land, because they've got to give the person something every single week. And I think it's a great idea until it isn't, but it can be a lot of pressure. And I think sometimes holding that idea of the goals, if we get into it really rigidly, like a rule, we start to miss other things. We might miss other patterns that are starting to show up between us and our patient. We might miss other themes or other important things if we've got ourselves kind of, tunnel visioned onto the goal. So I think
I agree. I think oftentimes for myself, it's that idea of like slow down. I think most humans right now, we're going at Mach 10 speeds all the time. And our work, and one of the gifts we can give folks, is to sort of have that space to slow down, process your feelings, your thoughts, remind yourself you have a body. We tend to be so cognitive, and I think goals can sometimes get really linked to not just productivity, but confirming that I'm good enough, or I'm doing a good enough job at therapy. And this is why it's successful, because there's a list of things I had to do and I did it.
For the patient and the therapist.
Right. And I actually think like a pretty helpful exposure for some folks is actually to be more free flowing. And what is it like to be in a space where you don't have a defined goal for every session, where you can judge right, wrong, good, bad?
Yeah. Or you don't even know what's going to happen in the session. And I guess, admittedly, as you know, I get into a little bit of the weeds with this sometimes, working as an analyst as well, where the goals are much less explicit. And so I find I have to balance it quite a bit. But even within just ACT, I do find sometimes the emphasis on goals sends me a little bit squirrely.
You're not the only one.
No. But I guess, too, there's also this idea of the, overt and covert goals. So sometimes people come in with a particular behavior they want to change or add in. Other times I find it's much more subtle, right? Like sometimes people need to get more willingness and diffusion with their inner world, but they don't come into therapy saying, please help me accept my anxiety and live better with it. I have yet to have that person come into
how many folks have come in and they say, I want support in my relationships. And as they walk in, you realize how dysregulated they are. And what they might really need is support and learning some skills to be able to navigate their feelings.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, too, my patients with OCD, where the, obvious goal is to reduce the compulsions, have them engage in more values-based behavior. But, and this is where, again, I get tripped up between the ACT and the analyst, is looking at what's actually underneath the OCD behavior. It's usually relational, but it's not obvious when they come in. It may not be obvious for a while. And it starts to kind of seep into the work without ever being explicitly stated, or at least not at the beginning. So, and even attachment dynamics. I find sometimes we might be working with somebody on that, but we might not put it out there as even an issue, a theme, or a goal, or a pattern for a little while.
So this is where we start with that. It depends, right? Because certainly if we were to think of it from the perspective of a health behavior, say somebody wants to go to the gym, that's where certain SMART goals might be helpful, because going to the gym is quite complicated. You have to think about, do you have the proper running shoes? Do you have a gym near you? Do you have the money to pay for the gym? Are you going to go with somebody? What are the exercise? Like, there's so many ways to break things down. And I think for some people, structure can be so helpful to do that.
Yeah. And then I wonder what they're going to come up with after they've gone to the gym, or if that was actually the goal. Like, was that actually that hard?
Yeah.
And it's interesting too. I find when people have a goal like that, that sort of the rest of the world as they see it just does, even once they start to do it, they really belittle themselves with that. Well, I should have been able to do that. Like I'm a fully functioning adult. So then you get really into the weeds about what was going on with that goal.
And if it was easy, all of us would be doing it. All of us would be going to the gym 3 times a week, would be doing weights twice a week, and it wouldn't be hard. I think that's where sometimes when you think about the goals, the ones that are a bit more covert, I sometimes notice not productivity, but improvement in the language. So they start using noticing or diffusing language, or they start spontaneously acknowledging feelings as they arise, as opposed to kind of doing these conversations about things that have happened in the past. They really start to embody the practice and acknowledging in that way. So I think that's where goals get quite fluid.
Yeah, I would agree. And I wanted to add too, even with that, we're talking about sort of this pretend patient that wanted to go to the gym. If it's that easy, they would have been doing it, but sometimes it is that easy. And then I think the whole goal thing starts to function as experiential avoidance. But sometimes we can miss it if we're like, oh, good, they took the step. But if you watch your patients closely, some are thrilled and some aren't, because it was really what they needed to do.
And that tends to be that cue that, okay, like what is the function and what is the piece that's missing? And can we get really curious about that?
Yeah. So I don't know. I think goals can be helpful, and I think goals can be a hindrance sometimes, but it does leave me with maybe a few not answered questions, which is, what's the function of the goal and for whom? Is it for insurance companies if you're working in a country where that's a thing? Is it for the patient? Is it to give your notes structure? Is it to help you keep track? And I think that's a big one. We don't want our patients languishing in therapy going nowhere.
Yeah.
So I think we as the therapist have to have an idea of what kind of changes are we and the patient looking for that are going to be helpful, and being able to track those. But I think there's all sorts of extra layers about the goals that can actually get in the way of the therapy if we're not careful.
Yeah. And I think ultimately it comes back to context matters, and also really highlighting how important coming back together and reformulating, as we talked about in another ACT mini, really coming back to that reformulation, and that can help support when and where and how goals can be really helpful, and in other times where they might be a form of avoidance.
Yeah. So I was just thinking as you were finishing off there, with SMART goals, it's like, okay, so let's say somebody's using defusing language. Are we going to make a goal about how measurable that is, how many times they do it, how many times they were doing it? No.
Yeah.
Right. But that might be a goal of therapy, is increasing emotion vocabulary, increasing defusing language. Like, I just think there's some subtleties that will kind of get lost in a way, or I don't know what the word is I want, but something where I think trying to switch it into a goal it doesn't work.
No. And I think that's more of for a therapist to think about noticing some of these things, but it doesn't have to be explicit.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I feel like I'm in a beautiful circle.
Right. Clear as mud.
Excellent. Why don't we stop there?
Yeah.
Okay. If you like this, let us know. If you have some comments or questions, let us know. Thanks for joining us.